Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the first ever Cyber Defense Weekly webcast. If you found your way here, thanks to the Cyber Defense Weekly newsletter that went out this morning, welcome, and I appreciate your following through on that newsletter. If you're not a current subscriber, simply go to threatchaos.com, and there's a form there that you can input your email address and contact information. And you also will get the Cyber Defense Weekly, where we cover news, analysis, and events regarding cyber defense, which I'll get into in a little bit just what that is. If you want to follow me on Twitter, there's my Twitter ID, Stiennon, over at twitter.com. So a little bit more introduction of me. I'm an independent industry analyst that covers the security space, and I've been in security for 15 years with experience at a startup and experience at PwC, executive positions at Fortinet and WebRoot Software, and a stint at Gartner as an industry analyst as well. And I'm the author of the just published Surviving Cyberwar, available from government institutes on their website as well as Amazon.com. As an industry analyst, it was my idea that I could reach a broader audience and expose kind of the daily research and thought process that an industry analyst goes through by creating this weekly webcast. Where I'll summarize news I've heard of the week and my analysis of that, and everything that's going on in the IT security field. Hard to do in 45 minutes, and actually this week I'll try and keep it short to encourage everybody to come back and dedicate at least half an hour every week to hearing my webcast. I wanted to start with a legislative update. I've been writing a lot about this. You might have seen my blogs syndicated to Forbes.com, where I've been criticizing some of the legislation that's currently going through from both houses of U.S. Congress, and obviously there's a lot of activity around the world as well, from the EU in particular, but even China is getting involved in cyber preparedness and cyber readiness. The Rockefeller-Snow bill is one of two that appear most likely to gain some traction, and it's working its way through Congress now. It's been through committee and was passed out of committee, so it's would be up for a vote. Of course, this is the last week of the session, and I rather doubt we'll see any cybersecurity, IT security-related bills passing Congress anytime soon, frankly. And in my opinion, that's a good thing. There are over 40 bills working their way through Congress. All of them take different approaches. Some of them apparently are just flag waving to raise issues internally and demonstrate that Congress is thinking about these things. But both the Rockefeller and Snow bill and the Lieberman bill, they've put a lot of thought into and had a lot of committee hearings and discussions on, and they feel, at least coming from these bill sponsors, that they've got a well-baked bill, and they've had personal discussions, at least with some of the staffers that are involved in doing this. Now, Rockefeller-Snow I criticize pretty roundly because it proposes an overlay of regulation on the industry in an attempt, as always, on the part of the government to try and control something that they feel that is out of control. And seeing their various approaches to the problems can be a little frightening to people in the IT security space. Rockefeller-Snow in particular is frightening because it layers on top of already legislated designation of critical infrastructure some requirements for reporting, auditing, and ultimately will be compliance around security. As we know, compliance is a huge, huge driver of security investments and a huge component of what IT security administrators and operators do every day, right? It's documenting and somehow reporting to their internal and external audit teams their state of compliance with whatever regulations. The most regulations that we've seen are actually very, very light. Sarbanes-Oxley has a one-line reference to instituting or implementing security frameworks, which could be ITIL, could be COBIT, doesn't even say what those are. Even HIPAA doesn't have really well-defined security requirements, and yet that turns into a lot of work for us. And to depending on your perspective on the value of regulation and compliance, that work could actually serve to be counter to improving the security posture of an organization. Rockefeller Snow, it goes beyond anything that's come before, and would require that those organizations that fall under this umbrella of critical infrastructure, of which there's over a dozen different branches of industry, of course telecom and oil and gas exploration and oil and gas pipelines fall under it, electrical grids, emergency responder communications, sure, all those things are indeed critical infrastructure, but farms, that's part of the critical infrastructure, and so are national monuments. And you can just imagine, those organizations, agriculture departments and farms in particular. What if you had a big industrial farm and all of a sudden they've got some IT security requirements to follow? It could be a huge, huge burden to the economy. And then the part that I think most IT security folks would have the biggest problem with is this overlay on top of all that of a certification requirement for anyone in those critical infrastructure fields who touch on IT security to be certified. And the bill leaves it wide open as to what that certification means. It gives the president and various departments the power to determine what those are and then enforce them and require, after only a couple of years, that everybody working in that field be certified. And we all know what pain that could cause, since the industry itself has trouble coming to grips with the needs for certification. Senator Joe Lieberman has a bill that's been getting some attention lately. The media and everybody likes to focus on the so-called internet kill switch, which originally was in the Rockefeller Snow bill, and the staffers there, responded to just the wild outburst of wrath at this idea that somehow you'd create a kill switch that would allow the executive branch to, in times of emergency, to shut off the internet. Scary concept. That was killed from Rockefeller Snow in the final version, but the Lieberman bill builds it back in, though it doesn't have quite the teeth. And yeah, anybody could imagine a situation where it might be better to block certain portions of the internet, for instance. But overall, because the mechanism doesn't exist today to do that in an effective manner, literally this is the old shooting oneself in the foot. The part of the Lieberman bill that's interesting to me is that it actually calls for the creation of two new offices, one in the executive branch that looks a lot like the one that Howard Schultz fills now of cybersecurity policy coordinator, which if you think about it, and certainly the way it was defined in the cybersecurity review that was put together by Melissa Hathaway, that position doesn't have any authority at all. Doesn't even have the authority to determine what policy should be. It's only coordinating the different policies of all of the branches of the federal government. The Lieberman bill has that in it, as well as, under DHS, an Office of Cybersecurity that really would set policies and enforce them. So it does create what I've always thought of as what a security czar should be. So at least they're getting closer to, if you're going to have, if centralized control and centralized dictates for cybersecurity are required, which frankly works in industry, then at least the Lieberman bill is getting closer to that. This week I wrote about something called HR 2271, the Global Internet Freedom Act. And I tore this one apart because there's some scary elements of it that really reflect the thinking of at least some of the members of Congress and their staffers who put this together. And I think this will never see the light of day. It's been stuck in committee since it was practically proposed a little over a year ago. But the intent is it's a response to some of the activities of Yahoo, Gmail, Microsoft, or Yahoo, Google, and Microsoft in their dealings with China, where they basically, I get to use the word kowtow in its original meaning, they kowtow to the Chinese government in the hopes of gaining a foothold in a very fast and obviously now a very large market for Internet consumption by complying